question and answers at the end of the webinar. If you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat box, as I mentioned, please feel free to do so with your name, organization, and location. Later in the webinar, there will be an opportunity for Q&A, questions and answers. So if you have specific questions, please put those into the Q&A box, not into the chat box. But for the introductions or for any comments, you can use the chat box. So to start with, just a few housekeeping points. So first of all, please keep yourself muted at all times. That's important so that we have a good connection and good audio. The webinar is being recorded. We've started the recording. So by remaining online, you're consenting to that recording taking place. As I mentioned, any questions, please put them into the Q&A box. You will see at the bottom of your screen. But if you have comments or anything you'd just like to share, which is not a specific question, then put that into the chat box. There will be a short survey at the end of the webinar, so we really please ask you to complete that. It does not take much time at all, but it's really useful for us and for the organisers to help make sure that these things run smoothly in future and to improve them in any ways that we can. The other point on housekeeping is that if you require interpretation, I think all the presenters are speaking in English today, but if you would like interpretation into French, you can do that. You will see again at the bottom, just at the bottom center of your screen, there is a picture of a globe and interpretation written there, so you can click on the interpretation icon and then select your chosen language. So please feel free to use that as required. So today, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the humble hand pump. Hand pumps are still used by vast numbers of people across the globe. Within Sub-Saharan Africa alone, it's estimated there's around 200 million people that rely on hand pumps as their primary source of drinking water. And that's approximately 700,000 hand pumps just within Sub-Saharan Africa. And then in other regions of the world, Latin America, Asia, and beyond, we know that many hundreds of millions also rely on hand pumps, either as their primary source of water or as a complementary or backup water supply. So we know that hand pumps are important, but we also know that there are significant challenges. And we find throughout the regions where they're used that many hand pumps fail prematurely and end up with communities and households being unable to access water as a result. So this can often be due to technical issues, could be related to the pump itself or to the borehole or to the water source, well or borehole that the hand pump is installed on. So stop the rot. What is stop the rot all about, apart from a snappy title? So back in beginning of 2021, Ask for Water and the SCAT Foundation, under the Rural Water Supply Network, launched a 50-month initiative called Stop the Rot. And the idea of the Stop the Rot initiative was to document the scale and extent of rapid hand pump corrosion, as well as the use of poor quality hand pump components in Sub-Saharan Africa. And ultimately, therefore, to bring about actions to address these specific problems. Now, the issue of corrosion and poor quality components are interlinked, and overall they contribute to poor hand pump performance, rapid failure, poor water quality, and often resulting in either hand pumps not working and abandonment of those sources, or long periods of downtime where users are unable to access water through the hand pump. So this is not a new issue. We've known about these issues for many years, but it seemed that it had come off the agenda, and that we were talking about the social aspects of community managed water supplies, for example. We were talking about the systems and services that were required to ensure that hand pumps keep functioning. But the technology piece of it sometimes got put to the background. So the Stop the Rot initiatives has come out with a number of publications, as you see there, which highlight critical issues with hand pumps, related to technical failures, related to the corrosion, related to supply chain issues, and then the cost of pump downtimes in terms of human health and well-being, in terms of money and time, which is just huge. Now, of course, there have been, as I say, this is not a new problem, and there have been many studies in the past around causes of non-functionality. But the Stop the Rot reports have really highlighted the fact that many of the hardware issues have not been sufficiently considered. And even though there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, we haven't really looked at this as rigorously as we should have done. And hence this initiative has really brought the hardware issues to the fore. Now, of course, by focusing on the hand pump here, we're not saying that other technologies are not relevant. It's not about hand pumps or alternative technologies. All different technologies have their place to play, their part to play. So, of course, we've seen that a lot more communities have access to solar-powered water systems, piped water systems, whether motorized or gravity-fed, which is great. And of course, our overall vision is that everyone should be able to get access to good quality piped water. However, we have to be honest that we will not be able to reach all community members across the continent with solar-powered water systems or conventional piped water supplies within the foreseeable future. We still have a huge, as I mentioned, a huge reliance on hand pumps. It's estimated about 23% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 230 million people, still rely on unsafe or distant water sources. And of course, in many rural areas, population densities are so low that it's often not possible to put in other water supply technologies. So we really are very reliant on hand pumps. So if we really are aiming towards universal access under the SDG Goal 6, then we need to make sure that hand pumps are not abandoned and that they are considered alongside alternatives, and that we really find ways to improve the reliability and sustainability of those hand pump water supplies. And that's really the focus of today's webinar. So just to introduce the agenda, we will start today with an overview from Richard Carter, and this will look at why hand pumps are important and why we should care about hand pumps in more detail than I've just alluded to. We'll then look at specific case studies from Malawi, from Beatrice Chizenga, and then we will look at this project in the improved hand pump in terms of the questionnaires that some of you have contributed to around current reliability of hand pumps and what are the areas of weakness that we need to address, and that will be presented by Michael Cook, or I think Abe or Michael from Design Outreach. And then, as I mentioned, we will have a significant period of time where we will look at the Q&A and give you the opportunity to ask questions to the presenters on anything that you've heard or any other issues that you would like to raise. So yes, just some of the speakers and panelists. So we have myself chairing, we have Richard Carter, as I say, who will give the first presentation. Also online, we have Kirsten Dannett, and Sean Fury, but Kirsten in particular, who's been leading the Stop the Rot project. So if you have specific questions around that. And then Beatrice Chizenga, as I mentioned, will be presenting our second presentation. And then Michael will present the third presentation, but any questions related to that specific presentation will be fielded by Abe Wright from Design Outreach and also Sandy Pollard from Neil Consulting, who is also online. So these are the speakers and panelists that you'll be able to direct your questions to in the Q&A and in the latter part of the webinar. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Richard Carter. Many of you know Richard well. He's worked in the real water supply sector for many years, and he's the director of Richard Carter and Associates, and he's also Professor Emeritus of International Water Development. So we will listen first to Richard's recorded presentation. Thanks very much.
Technologies are developed, used for a while, and then they often become obsolete. Who among you still has a typewriter or a telex machine in your office? I hope at least some of you in this webinar feel that way about hand pumps, that they're old hat, they're obsolete. Otherwise, we'll be preaching to the converted. But maybe the hand pump is more like the bicycle, more than 200 years old and still evolving. Let's see. In 2015, I presented a paper at the International Association of Hydrogeologists conference in Rome, which I entitled Long Live the Humble Hand Pump. And in that presentation, I drew attention to the view that was becoming more common, in which some people say that hand pumps in rural Africa and Asia have had their day. They're too difficult to manage. And pumping should use solar energy, which is getting cheaper and cheaper. And furthermore, our ambition should be piped, treated, and household connections for everybody. Now, I'm going to say something a little bit different. That many dispersed small communities will continue to need hand pumps, boreholes, well beyond 2030, the end of the SDG period. Perhaps for another 2 or 3 decades even. We do know that the performance of such point sources needs a lot of improvement, but a few simple measures by engineers, by hydrogeologists and decision makers could really improve the performance of hand pumps very significantly. A hand pump here in Zambia provides a basic water service for the community, but it is prone to breakdown. Reliability is an issue, functionality is lower than we would like to see. So we do need better pump designs and quality control of the manufacture of hand pumps and the manufacture and supply of spare parts. Of course, it's one thing to have a design, it's one thing to have better quality control, but we also need to see adoption and uptake of any improvements that are made. And that all needs to be set in the background of improvements to the siting of boreholes, the design of boreholes, the supervision of construction, and then the completion, the testing, and so on that follow the completion of a borehole. So improvements to pump designs fit within a wider ecosystem, which involves not only the pumping technology, but also the borehole and the groundwater resources on which that borehole depends. Who's using hand pumps now? Well, the obvious place to start is people who use point groundwater sources. And in the publicly available data, what that refers to is people using boreholes, wells, or springs. But of course, many open wells, many springs don't have pumps of any sort. And so we need to narrow down the focus a little bit. Users of boreholes and protected wells, well, again, users of both those sources may include motorized pumps. and a protected hand dug well may use a windlass and a bucket rather than a pump. In trying to figure out who's using hand pumps in sub-Saharan Africa, and I'll say a little bit about South Asia and Southeast Asia in a moment, the Stop the Rot study found that nearly 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa are reliant on about 700,000 hand pumps as their main source of drinking water. We don't know the numbers in Asia, but it could be that there are another several 100 million people there. We just haven't done the detailed analysis. But the Stop the Rot study concluded that about 19% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa rely on hand pumps for their main drinking water supply. Of course, there were a lot of assumptions behind those estimates, which I won't go through in detail, but they're summarized at the bottom of that slide. Now, the question is, will there be similar user communities in 2030 at the end of the SDG period, in 2040 and beyond? Of course, there's the trend towards piped systems, treated systems, solar pumped systems, such as the one in the photograph here in northern Kenya. There are obvious issues associated with a transition to these sort of technologies, and cost and management are the two primary factors that need to be taken into account. But there are hidden issues too about water resources, about the consideration of water quality and supply quantities involved. There's an issue of economy of scale too. Solar systems are often most cost effective for larger communities, although in the next slide I'll mention a couple of options which can result in direct swap out of a hand pump for a solar option. So the two direct swap out options that I know of are the Lorentz submersible pump, the PS2 100, and a more recent example, the impact pump, the SLX 40. But it's still, if we want to compare solar and hand pumps, one of my colleagues refers to this not as comparing apples and pears, but apples and bricks. They are so dissimilar. A hand pump, of course, involves manual lift. There's no storage to cover downtimes. A solar pump, on the other hand, involves motorized lift. There's always water storage involved, which can keep the users supplied for a period of hours or days, depending on how big that storage capacity is. The Lorentz system is a small submersible pump, but with some smart technology which enables electronic payment. The impact pump is a very different kind of technology where the big focus in the design of the unit has been on reliability. It's based on the hydraulic ram principle, and in effect it's a lift extender driven by a solar pump at the surface. So it brings all the challenges of repairs and maintenance to the surface rather than in the down the hole components. Solar pumping, of course, offers easier options for electronic payments, as well as remote fault monitoring and even groundwater monitoring of water levels and water quality. There are some issues. I've already alluded to the fact that solar pumping systems provide inevitably a higher level of service. But because of cost, some designers of solar pump systems design for only enough water for drinking and cooking and not for the larger amounts of water that are necessary for hygiene and other domestic uses. And there is an issue around the possibility for aquifers to support higher abstraction rates than hand pumps. A recent study in West Africa, here's a diagram from that study showing for the basement complex geology, broken down into a number of different categories, what the likelihood of different yield classes is. So, for example, if you look at the bottom part of that chart, the combined data for all the different subcategories of the basement, about 13% of boreholes could only support a yield less than 0.1 litre per second, so less than a normal hand pump would demand. The red block shows the likelihood of the borehole being able to support something in the region of 0.1 to 0.5 litres per second, so comfortably supply a hand pump. And then you see the smaller probabilities as you move to the right of the diagram for the higher yields that we might be looking at for either solar irrigation or larger solar systems for bigger communities. There is a point here that's important, and that is that we can't look at the comparative costs of hand pumps and solar in isolation from the likely revenues and the effectiveness of the management arrangements. And usually if a hand pump were to be swapped out for a solar alternative, then it's not just a matter of changing the technology, but there would be a much greater focus on revenue collection and on professionalized management, which is necessary for the solar option, but which may also be more effective in terms of functionality and reliability. So although the real capital and recurrent costs of solar alternatives are significantly higher, a related issue, it seems, is that consumers are much more willing to pay for the higher level of service that they're likely to get from a solar system. I'll put this chart up now where you see that only on average in this particular study, 30% of rural households were paying for water at all. And there is evidence that users of solar systems may be willing to pay more. The third bullet point on this slide makes the point that a hand pump managed by an individual water user committee can't offer the scale, the economies of scale and the opportunities for cross subsidies in the way that it's possible with a professionalized management where wealthier and poorer communities are brought together under one service provider. The final bullet point on the slide is to say that if there is insufficient sunshine, or when a nearby solar system that people are using is being repaired, they may revert to the hand pump, or they may prefer to use the hand pump to avoid the higher costs of solar pumped water. In thinking about alternatives to hand pumps, the leave no one behind principle is important. And you may be wondering from what I've said so far um, whether I'm in favour of professionalised solar pump services in which users pay a reasonable tariff. And the answer is yes, but it's a yes but. Out of sub-Saharan Africa's 635 million rural people, 200 million, as we've seen, are served by hand pumps, which often fail, which break down regularly. And there are another 146 million using unimproved sources, that is, open wells and so on, or open water, and some of them could be served by hand pumps too. There may be even larger numbers in Asia. We just don't have the analysis of the data at this stage. Some of the reliability challenges of hand pumps have been known for a long time. The Design Outreach project, which is the focus of this webinar, aims to address some of these. This is an example of the corrosion of a galvanized iron rising main on an India Mark II hand pump in northern Uganda. So coming back to my starting point, long live the humble hand pump? Well, yes, especially if it really can live longer and serve communities more reliably. And that's what we seek to achieve in this project. I'm in favour of the transition to solar, but hand pumps have a really important part to play, and we need to work hard to make them serve their communities more reliably. Thank you. Technologies are developed.
Okay, thank you very much to Richard for, I think, a very clear presentation and really making a case for why we do need to consider hand pumps, not as a standalone solution, but as one solution amongst many, including more advanced technologies. So thank you to Richard. If you have any questions, feel free to start putting those into the Q&A box now. We will fill those at the end of the 3 presentations, but please do, I see that a couple of you already have, but please do feel free to put those in now so that we can start preparing to respond. But let's move on to the next presentation, which is from Beatrice Chizenga in Malawi, and she'll be presenting some case studies from Design Outreach's work in Malawi. So over to Beatrice.
Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Chizenga. I'm the Regional Field Director for Design Outreach and based in Lilongwe, Malawi. I'm hereby to briefly explain to you about the 3 case studies in Malawi, which are highlighting the relationship of the hardware quality and the success of the hardware in terms of reliable water supply. So I will start with a community which is called Kanyanda. Kanyanda community is in Nchisi district. This is a community which is highly populated, about 1,500 people. And what is interesting in this community is that there was a borehole, and there had been 3 AfriDefs which had been there before, and however, there had been much problems with the water supply because the hardware was frequently breaking down, particularly with capital expenses. And then till our partner came on board in 2018 and installed a life pump to supply water consistently. Looking at the data from the pump, which uses the satellite monitors, we can see that the first year about the pump was being used for about 12 hours in a day, and it was something happened from the second year where there has been a drop to about 10 hours in a day or 8 hours in a day, and this is because of the mechanized system, which was just put about 150 meters away from where this pump is. And what is interesting here is that despite that there is a solar-powered system, people are still using quite a lot, relying on the life pump as their main source of water. As we can see, there have been no breakdown for the past 3 years. The pump has consistently been in operation just because of the hardware, high quality of the hardware or the fast wearing parts. The other thing which we can see from there is the relationship to say the hand pumps is still very important here, despite that there is a mechanized system. People are still using the hand pump, which is quite interesting. The next community I'm going to talk about is called Zolomondo. Zolomondo is in Kasungu district in Tie Chulu, and this pump was also had prior to the life pump installed here. There are also 3 affidavits which has been used in the same place, and it was the same stories of frequent breakdowns till the community resorted to using the shallow well, which was contaminated, which had dirty water. They had no any other option. And there are so many stories where communities could leave very early to try to find water there, which was not even good water at all, till the life pump came on board. And this is the first pump we have in Malawi. As we can see from the data, the pump has been used for the past unfortunately, the links were only installed for about 3 or 4 years, but this pump has been there since 2013, and there is no history of breakdown at all. And the communities are very excited. There have been so much social development happening in this community. This is a very dry area, and right now people are having vegetable gardens. They are having raising the pigs because they have water nearby. So there's quite a lot of impact because the water has been consistently being supplied throughout the year in the past 10 years, and this is all attributed to the impact of the high quality hardware parts, which is directly related to reliable water supply in this community. The last one I am going to talk about is in Ntenje. Ntenje community is also in Malawi. What is interesting about this community is it is in the peri-urban area of Lilongwe City, and this is a large community as well. Over 1,800 people had been using the AfriDef in this place. Unfortunately, there have been quite a lot of vandalism of AfriDefs, and also because of the non-functionality of the capital for the capital expenses. The government had consulted us. That was the headquarters to say if we could put a pump which has a reliable hardware, which is the life pump, in this place so that there is no vandalism anymore. So we had installed the life pump in 2018, and since then there had been a lot of problems, a lot of diarrhea cases in the new community before the life pump was installed, because they were getting water from the river, which is just near to the pump as well. So we have seen a lot of success stories from the healthy people stating that community has diarrhea among the children has drastically been reduced in the nearby health facility because of the provision of this pump, the life pump, and this is all because this pump is a high quality hardware. One, it cannot be vandalized, and secondly, it has the impact of providing reliable water supply to the communities, which directly also impacts on their health as well. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Beatrice. I think, again, a very clear and succinct presentation, which really outlines the importance of technology, and that technology does have a role to play. So in this particular case, they were looking at one pump, the life pump, which is not a public domain pump, which we're looking at through the Stop the Rot initiative. But nonetheless, it shows that if we can improve the reliability of hand pumps and their resistance to issues like vandalism and poor functionality, then we can have a massive impact on communities and their lives and their health and well-being. So I think it's a nice example. There's 3 case studies of where we see that technology and improving hand pump technology can have a positive outcome. So now we'll move on to the presentation from Michael Cook from Design Outreach, which is related to, he'll introduce the current project, and he'll also give an overview of the reliability questionnaire and the results that have come out of that so far. And there will be some specific questions that we'd like to put to you in relation to this particular project at the end. But over to Michael for now. Thank you.
Hello and good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Michael Cook, and I'm the Design Outreach Project Lead for the India Mark II and AfriDev Handpump Upgrade Project, also the R&D Partnerships Director for Design Outreach. So I'm hoping after enjoying the last 2 talks from Richard and Beatrice that you are convinced of the importance of hand pumps, that you're convinced of the need for greater reliability of these public domain hand pumps, and also that hand pumps will be needed for a very, very long time. And like Richard said, even though technologies like solar pumps are increasing, which they very well should be, we don't want to leave behind any of the dear people who are still relying on hand pumps. And data shows that hand pumps are still an important part of the toolkit, even when installed alongside motorized solutions. So now I'd like to give you a project overview, and then we'll follow that up with a sneak preview into the results from our hand pump questionnaire. So we understand that improving hand pump reliability is a monumental task. And not only in improving the design, which is necessary, but also the supply chain, quality control, and then adopting whatever improvements have been developed. And because of that, Design Outreach has partnered with Neil Consulting Engineers from the UK, Sandy Pollock and Paul Dawson. And we've embarked on what we think is a 5-year journey to improve hand pump reliability. And even though this is a big challenge, we believe that by partnering with people who are passionate about solving this problem, like yourselves, and walking arm in arm together in the same direction, we can improve and move the needle in a positive direction. So you might wonder, why Design Outreach, why Neil Consulting Engineers? Well, since 2010, Design Outreach has been immersed in the persistent issues of public domain hand pumps. We've conducted research, attended conferences, we're part of the RWSN Stop the Rot Action Group, and we also work with our field partners. And many of these folks complement AfriDev and India Mark II in their portfolio, along with the DO Life Pump. And we've also visited many of the communities in the 10 African countries where DO works. Also, we've, as a team, grown in the past 4 years to 30+ full and part-time employees, and we have an extensive network of volunteer engineers and designers, many of whom are experts in their respective field. And we've collaborated with industry and academic partners and field implementing partners. So this puts us in a good place to work together with all of you to move toward a common goal. Now, Neal Consulting Engineers, now called Polo Designs, they've carried out pro bono design and development work in this appropriate technology space with hand pumps and wind pumps since 1984. At one point, they were manufacturing wind pumps in country in more than 10 countries. And they've also developed a deep well hand pump. Now you might wonder, how is this project funded? Well, it's not funded by some big grant that when it disappears, the work comes to a screeching halt. Rather, it's funded from a private donor base of individuals, churches, and organizations who support the ongoing work of design outreach. And it is running in parallel with another project that Sandy and Paul are working on with WaterAid, which is focusing on India Mark II and solving the corrosion issues with the riser pipes. Now I'd like to draw your attention to our core team at the top right. You've already heard Beatrice's talk. So we have Beatrice and Dixon in our Malawi field office, and Chazela is in Zambia, and they are our core team from Africa. Then we have, of course, Paul and Sandy from the UK, and then Abe and Rick and myself from the US. Now we've expanded beyond the core team, and we have a very extensive advisor team. And I won't read all the names, but you can see we have representation from Uganda, Malawi, Zambia, US, UK, Switzerland, and so we have quite an extensive, very, very deeply experienced advisor team to work with. And on the left here, you can see the partnerships that I had mentioned before. RWSN Stop the Rot Action Group, also working relationships with universities and hand pump experts. So even though the studies on specific technical failure modes of hand pumps is limited, there are already known failure modes from anecdotal evidence and from recent studies. And I'd like to highlight this study from Messiah University that highlighted multiple failure modes of hand pumps. And there also have been various attempts by individual organizations, universities, and inventors over the past several decades to improve these pumps. And we say a huge thank you to each person, each organization that has worked on this challenge. So unfortunately, there have been many efforts scattered around the globe, and they haven't gained traction or widespread adoption. So we hope to change that, but by combining efforts with all of these organizations and working together toward this common goal. So the design challenge for this project is to firstly improve the repair interval on fast wearing parts from 6 months to an average of 2 to 3 years. Also ensure that expensive parts that require major repairs last 10 plus years. In some cases, they should last 20 years. Also eliminate corrosion from pipes and excessive lead and iron from water. And then advocate for the update of the IM2 and AFRIDEV standards. Although there have been many studies done over the years, we wanted to gain a fresh perspective from the field. So we recently launched a hand pump reliability questionnaire, and many thanks to those on this webinar who have already responded. We really appreciate that. Our goal of this questionnaire is to get a better understanding of the failure modes and what specific hand pump components are contributing to early failure, and also to set up project priorities, and we really appreciate your help. So I'd like to here soon show you a sneak preview of the data, the initial data which we've had so far, which does show early failure of certain components. I'd like to draw attention that we have heard from 26 different countries, which is phenomenal. But I'd also like to draw attention to the fact that most of the responses are from Malawi and Zambia, where we do have design outreach team members who have been expediting the questionnaire responses. So that means we're skewed heavily toward AFRIDEV. And we really want to get more responses, not only for India Mark II and III, but from other countries that use AfriDev as well. So we really would like your help for that. Please keep in mind that this data is limited in response quantity and geographic location, as you can see, but we did want to show you this early data, which does reveal some surprising results. Well, so far we've received over 200 responses to the hand pump questionnaire, and from the results compiled so far, we can see that 35% are pump mechanics, 31% are government officers, 17% are NGO officers, 16% are considered other, and then 1% have a combined role of pump mechanic and government officer. Then we ask the question, do you agree that hand pumps and reliability will be important for some years in the future? Interestingly enough, the results from our questionnaire correlate very well with Richard's talk about the need for hand pumps long into the future, even though newer technologies are ramping up. So the average view is that we're going to need them for over 20 years, and 31% of respondents believe hand pumps will be needed for 50 years in the future. So on this slide, you can see that with the data that we've compiled so far, we have 133 responses from AfriDev and 36 related to India Mark II and III. And you can see the average pump depth is very similar, 38 meters for India Mark II and III and 35.8 on AfriDev. And we do want to get more responses, especially on India Mark II and III, so we can have a statistically significant data and be able to really have a clear picture of what is going on in the field. So here is the first slide that shows years to failure for certain components. Now, you know, we'd like to have shown pictures on here. Most of you are familiar with these terms. If you are not, I would invite you to go to Dr. Kirsten Danner's Stop the Rot Report 3 and go to page 6 and 7 where it has the drawing, the assembly drawing schematic for both India Mark II and AfriDev, and it clearly marks out these components. So you can see here we have riser pipe breakage in 5 and 4 years. Those that are highlighted in red shows that we believe that these should be improved. Leakage in 4 years for each one, and then pump rod breakage in 5 years and 4 years. So, you know, these are very expensive repairs. This is capital expense, and it was a bit surprising that AfriDev showed that it had riser pipes failing this soon, since they're PVC. Now the next page here of components, years to failure. Bucket seals, 4 years on India Mark II and III, which is very respectable. Now look at AfriDev. The respondents so far show that those bucket seals are failing in 1.2 years. This is wearing out too quickly. And in fact, we've heard anecdotal feedback that some are wearing out much faster than that. Also, the cylinder liners, 5 years to failure. That's a very expensive repair. This is capital expense. Now we're looking at handle pivot bushings or bearings or bushings. On AfriDev, those are failing at 1.4 years according to our responses. That's very quick. That's a very quick failure, and it does provide an opportunity for design improvement. Okay, on this slide, we show handle weld fracture, 9 and 7 years for India Mark II and AfriDev. Nuts and bolts loose or missing, 4 years for each. But look at what stands out on this slide. Pump stand flange fracture, 11 years for India Mark II, 6 years for AfriDev. Now we were a little surprised because we've heard that the issue was more prominent on India Mark II, but the survey shows AfriDev is actually worse for pump stand flange fracture. Now, this is very expensive work, as you know. This is like civil engineering work where you break up the concrete to reinstall pump base. So these really should last much longer. This hand pump failure mode data that we've just discussed, with average years to failure for each component, even though it's preliminary data, it certainly indicates there's room for improvement on multiple components. This initial data, along with previous studies by other individuals and organizations, shows the need for design improvements as well as improvements with the supply chain and quality control of hand pumps and their components. However, we need more data, and we need your help to get that data. Even though this questionnaire so far, with a little over 200 responses, and the average person representing about 100 pumps, that means this questionnaire represents around 20,000 hand pumps. And yes, even though that seems significant, keep in mind that most of these results come from 2 countries. Not only that, we only have 36 responses that were specifically India Mark II and III. So we need to get more data to have statistical significance with our decision making. And if you think about it, there are countries like India, for example, that have millions of India Mark II hand pumps. If you have a contact in India or other countries, please reach out and share the news and cut and paste the link that's attached to this webinar from the list of useful links and send them to your colleagues. And thank you in advance for your support. Also, not only would we like more India Mark II responses, but we would love to have representation from other countries that use the AfriDev hand pump as well, that are currently underrepresented in our study. This is a monumental challenge to improve hand pump reliability. It's a lot of hard work, but we believe if we walk together and we pull together in the same direction, with your help, it is possible to make an improvement. People that rely on these public domain hand pumps deserve better, and better can be achieved with your help. Also, I wanted to let you know that although I'm not able to attend this presentation in person due to a previous obligation, my colleagues Abe Wright and Sandy Pollack are planning to be on the call in person to respond to your questions regarding these survey results. Thank you very, very much for collaborating with us on this hand pump improvement project. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
So thank you to Michael for introducing the project on improving public domain hand pumps, India Mark IIs and AfriDevs, and also for outlining the initial results, at least from the hand pump reliability questionnaire that has been shared, as he mentioned, across 26 countries. You will have seen in the chat box that there are some links to that questionnaire. So if you have not already completed the questionnaire, please do feel free to follow the link in the relevant language and complete that, because the more data that the project team can get, the better, in order to really work out which areas and to focus on. In terms of the questions, I see that there are several questions popping up in the Q&A, and I'll go to those in a moment. But just maybe it would be good to get some feedback from you, particularly on Michael's presentation there. He mentioned that the project objectives are to increase the period between failures for fast wearing parts to 2 to 3 years, and for the more expensive parts like riser pipes and pump stands, etc., to more than 10 years between failures, which would be a significant improvement on those figures that were shown in the questionnaire results. So if there are any reflections on those specific objectives around the components or any questions around why they've been determined in that way, then again, please feel free to put those into the question and answer box. Also, if there are any specific results of the questionnaire that surprise you or that you would like to comment or ask questions on, again, feel free to put those into the Q&A box. And I suppose also linked to that, if there are specific aspects of hand pumps that you think maybe didn't come out as strongly as you expected through those questionnaires that you feel need to be addressed, need to be tackled, then again, please feel free to put a question in relation to that or a comment. So as I mentioned, several of you have already been putting comments or questions into the Q&A box. So maybe I can start with Richard, as he was the first one to present. And I think there's some questions that you've already answered, Richard, that you may wish to elaborate on. But there's also some new questions there in relation to groundwater and hydrogeological assessments in relation to the expansion of solar alongside the use of hand pumps. And then there's also other questions on specific components that you may wish to answer, or maybe others will come in afterwards. But if I can hand over to you first, Richard, thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, I'm just looking at some of the questions in the Q&A box. I have answered most of them, I think. The one from Mubiana, I wasn't totally clear what you were getting at, but you seem to be implying the use of groundwater from hand pumps for agriculture. You referred to moving away from rain-fed to across the year production. Where that's possible, it's a great thing. Where the groundwater resources are sufficient and they can be used for that purpose. And one of the benefits is that when you're using water productively in that way, you have an income flow which can be used for maintaining pumps, among other things. Otherwise, I think I've put an answer to all the ones that were directly addressed to me. I
think there's one, Richard, from Steve Kamwenda, that he talks about. I mean, he's really talking about the issue of groundwater and hydrogeological assessments.
Yeah, I think there's two issues here. One is that there's a general assumption that for solar pumping, the abstraction rates are necessarily higher than for hand pumps. And I guess I would say that's not necessarily the case. The point is that when solar systems are put in, to achieve cost effectiveness, they generally need to be quite large systems, which then imply quite large abstraction rates. And not all aquifers can support that. I was just looking at some data this morning from Malawi with some boreholes, sorry, from Mali, not Malawi. Some boreholes are just not capable even of supporting a hand pump. So we need to look at the specifics of the groundwater hydraulics, the groundwater resources. But I did mention in my presentation two direct alternatives for hand pumps, which are solar driven. They're smaller units. They represent a direct swap out. One of them was a conventional electric submersible pump. They have quite a limited life, surprisingly, just a few years. The alternative, the impact pump, which I mentioned, was designed specifically with reliability and longevity, as well as affordability. in mind. It's at the beginning of its trials in the field, so it'll be really interesting to follow that one.
Thanks, Richard. I think that's fine for now. So maybe we can go over to Abe, and if there's something that comes in for you again, Richard, we'll come back to you. So Abe, I think there's a couple of questions sort of related to your project and Michael's presentation. Firstly, in relation to corrosion and whether there's been any consideration of looking at non-corrosive technologies for pedestals, as well as for pipes and rods that we've looked at. And then there's also another question related to the questionnaire, and whether that questionnaire looks at ease of use, particularly for women and children, as well as some of the components that were in there. And I think there's also a third one, perhaps. I'll just give them all to you at once, so if you don't mind, which was on around spare parts supply chain, which perhaps is a broader question, but whether there's specific questions looking at quality control in relation to supply chains. Thanks, Abe. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. And Sandy perhaps can back me up here on some of my answers if he has some additional information. Yeah, the corrosion question is obviously a big one that we want to answer with this project. And perhaps I'll let Sandy chime in a little bit more with the challenges with the riser pipes. You know, I saw another question too about maybe making a hybrid between life pump and some other designs, and you know that's been our experience with life pumps. So we've the past 13 years, and we've learned a lot through it. And so it's interesting to see some of the designs converging in terms of what we've learned on the drive rods, on the riser pipes, on the pedestals. The challenge is always the cost. So one of the, I think, innovations of this project will be how can we create a lower cost riser pipe system that's not stainless steel. Stainless steel is very expensive, especially with the more recent challenges, global challenges, the war in Ukraine. Stainless steel prices have increased significantly. But how can we create a durable yet low-cost riser pipe system that's lead-free? Another challenge that that hand pumps face is lead due to the galvanization being released into the water. So before I move on to any other questions, Sandy, would you like to answer any of the technical bits of that question?
Thank you. Yes, I'll just come in very briefly. The question was about pedestal corrosion. We haven't actually considered that as an issue as yet, because in our experience, the problems with the pedestals are cracking of the flanges around the welds and not specifically corrosion. Anyway, if corrosion becomes a widespread issue on pedestals, of course we would look at it. We've concentrated on corrosion on the riser pipes on the Indian Mark II, which is a well-known problem. And together with WaterAid, we're developing a high-strength PVC alternative, which is similar cost to the galvanized steel pipe, but far, far cheaper than a stainless steel pipe. So that's just an example of something that's already underway, but it's not specifically part of this project. This project with design outreach at present is still in the data gathering phase to try and decide which specific issues we should tackle. Some issues, almost any design issue could be improved. The question is whether one should improve it. If the problem is not too severe, one should concentrate on a hit list of items that will yield a big overall improvement.
Yeah, that's well said, Sandy. Thank you. Yeah, and then in terms of the supply chain, obviously it's one thing to design a better pump, but the supply chain is in working with manufacturers and in adoption, as Richard said in his presentation, that's all part of the answer. And you can see perhaps some of the challenges we're facing right now is just that the components are not being made to the right specification. They need to be increased, but we also believe that there's opportunities to improve the design for manufacturing so that it's easier for the manufacturers to make, it's lower cost. We can, through this project, and we're developing relationships with manufacturers. And part of this as well is going to be, as Michael said, linking arms with others and helping have champions who are going to help drive adoption of an improved hand pump design, so that it's not just another project that gets thrown over the fence, but actually something that crosses the finish line and can improve people's lives. Sandy? Sandy, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. Could I come in with a specific example to illustrate the difference between design issues and perhaps quality control issues and supply chain issues? In the presentation that Michael just gave, he showed that the Afridev plunger bucket seal lasts on average, I think, 1.2 years, whereas the India Mark II bucket seals last on average about 4 years. Now, if you think about it, they both suffer the same potential problems of supply chain inadequacies, poor materials, etc. But one is lasting 3 times longer than the other. And that comes down, in my view, to design. The India Mark II has a double seal, and the Afridev has a single seal. So it's a very simple idea would be to change the Afridev from a single seal to a double seal, and it would at least double the life of the seal, possibly more than double it, at very little cost. So these are examples where design can make an impact, but our project will not just look at design, it will look at all the other issues of quality control, training, installation quality, parts supply, etc.
Thanks, Peter. I believe I answered all the questions. Did I?
I think there was just one, Abe, on the from Louisa about the user issues in the survey, whether it looks at that or not.
Oh, right. Thank you. Yeah. So we, this wasn't necessarily a human factors survey. We were specifically focused on reliability for this questionnaire. So we really wanted to drill down to answer one question, like Sandy said, what are the priorities for this project? As he mentioned, there's been a lot of anecdotal evidence. We've heard from others. There's been some publications. There's work that Sandy's been doing in parallel with another project. But we specifically wanted to drill down. What are the priorities for this project in terms of reliability? Yeah, there's probably a whole other survey we could do on human factors as well, but that wasn't the point of the survey. Thank you. Great,
thanks for the clarification. I was thinking maybe I could bring Beatrice in as well, because there was some questions which may be are sort of more related to some of the case studies that she presented, in terms of there was one about that it's not just about the technology itself, but the availability of repair and maintenance experts and the charges that they or the costs that they charge, and whether that was part of the ROT as well. So it might be good to get some reflections from Beatrice on that. And then there's also a question from Karine there as well, that whether it's worth repairing pumps or not. Which I guess is slightly rhetorical, but still relevant. Beatrice, would you like to come in as well? Or do you have connectivity issues? Oh no, there you are.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the question I think was asking whether institutional capabilities can improve the survival of the hand pumps. And in my response, what I said was that yes, to a greater extent, if we build the capacity of the community, training them to maintain the hand pumps, yes, it can. But still, there is a ceiling, there is a limit, because if it's minor expenses, they will be able to manage that. But if it's capital expenses, then it's beyond their control. It's the issues of revenue collection. If the part is worth $200 or $250, certainly communities who are living below the poverty line, they would struggle to do that. That's why the most important thing is to make sure that the design of the infrastructure, the parts, are high quality, so that eventually we have consistent water supply for these communities. And I gave an example of Zoromondo. Zoromondo is 10 years now, no breakdown at all. Yet in the same pedestal, there had been 3 AfriDevs which had been breaking down capital expenses. The community couldn't maintain them till the community had to go back, drawing water from dirty water from the shallow wells, unprotected shallow wells. So yes, we can, the communities, we can do to some extent, but still the issues of revenue, if it's beyond the capital expense, they will still struggle and it will not work. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. And while Abe, you're still there, and Sandy, there was one question specifically about the filling in the questionnaire and whether that should be done per country. So maybe you could respond to that. And then I think also there was a question as to why the project's looking at India Mark pumps and AfriDevs, but not Vernier pumps, which are at least standardized pumps in some countries, but obviously they're also a proprietary pump. So maybe you could comment on those, or any of the others that you may have seen come up there as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, as Michael said, we're looking for more data specifically for India Mark II, but also for the AfriDev outside of Malawi. Most of our data came from Malawi. So the way we had set up the survey was for perhaps district officers or pump mechanics who might oversee a certain number of pumps. If you are across several countries, it would be nice for us if you fill out the survey several times. So, you know, if you have experience with India Mark II and AfriDev, you could fill out the survey several times for both of those pumps, or in different countries as well. If your experience is different in different countries, it'd be really helpful for us to segment that data with your different experience, if you have those different segments in your experience. And then the question about Vernier pump, yeah, I'm familiar with the Vernier pump. Like you said, it's a proprietary pump. Just like the Life Pump's a proprietary pump, we set this project in motion to look specifically at the most common public domain hand pumps that haven't been updated in quite a while, and asking ourselves, how can we improve the reliability of those hand pumps? So that would be a question perhaps we'd have to direct to the folks at Vernier. Sandy, did you have anything else to add?
Not to those points, but there's also a question from Javan Nkosi, or several questions about the PVC pipes that I mentioned. So I'd be happy to talk about that very briefly now, if there's time.
Yeah, please.
These PVC pipes are very lightweight, a fraction of the weight, roughly half the weight of a galvanized steel pipe. And so there are no special lifting techniques required. And in fact, we attach what's called generally a safety rope to the bottom pipe. So lifting the pipes doesn't actually require any tools at all. We do have some special tools for lifting the pipes, but frankly, 2 men and a pair of gloves, one pulling on the rope, one guiding the pipe, will easily install the pipe to a depth of 50, 60 meters. This is currently undergoing field testing on 100 pumps, or about to start on 100 pumps. We've already had extended field trials over the last 4 years on half a dozen pumps.
So we still have a few questions that are coming in. So if there's any links to the research, I don't know if that's something that's available in the public domain yet, or whether that's something you'll share later, Abe, once you have more results.
Yeah, our intention is to make it public once we have the results finalized, and we will be publishing the data. As Michael said, we considered it preliminary data right now just because we're trying to get more, get our sample size up specifically for the Indy Mark II pumps. But we'd be happy to share that publicly once we get to that point.
I think what I'll do is there's still a few outlying ones there, but maybe I can ask Kirsten from Ask for Water, and who's been leading the Stop the Rot project, to come in as well. So Kirsten, any sort of general reflections on what you've heard, but also, yeah, there's questions here around, you know, the environment that the pumps are in, and the importance of site selection, whether work has already been done on some of these components in the past. So maybe it'd be good to hear, yeah, your take on that, and any other issues. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, and thanks to all of you for being here. I mean, it's fantastic to see, you know, almost, yeah, we're over 130 people on this webinar about hand pumps. And I particularly would like to thank Design Outreach and really welcome Design Outreach, Neil Consulting, to this hand pump field. I mean, you've been working on this for a long time, Neil Consulting, and you're now getting stronger with this partnership. But hand pumps have been really not particularly fashionable in development aid speak. So they're used, and I was astounded by the numbers that I found in doing the research. They're used by about 19%, we think, of the population of Africa, just as their main source. They're probably even more using it as a secondary source. So it's fantastic, I think, to have all these people here, all of you here, and really to have Design Outreach and Neil Consulting, and also the work with WaterAid, really looking in depth at pumps and shining the spotlight on hand pumps. Because even if there is a transition to other sources, there's still a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. There have been a few points put in the chat and the Q&A pointing out around other quality issues apart from the hand pump design, which is really the subject of this webinar. And the Rural Water Supply Network theme on groundwater has been doing a lot, particularly on the professional drilling side. And I'll pop the link in for the RWSN webpage on drilling. There's a lot of information already. And as Pete, you know, raised, the issues of siting is key, issues of drilling design, construction, supervision, oversight, and in fact, issues that go right back in the chain to the project planning and the contracting and the procurement that are all very important to ensure that a borehole is absolutely high quality. So with this webinar, we're not saying that those issues are not important, they are, but this webinar is focusing on the pump. And I think the last thing I'll say, which is what I looked at in the third Stop the Rot study, was around quality of components and the supply chains, is with the privatization of drilling, and often actually the drillers are responsible for buying the hand pumps. The supply chain can be quite complicated, and it can be quite difficult to trace actually even where particular components have come from. So I think there's a lot of work that's needed globally, and as some of you have alluded to that, including you, Muti, to really control the supply chain, ensure that the specified components are being bought and installed. And I'm happy to hear that that's an issue that Design Outreach are also interested in looking at, and understand that that won't happen overnight. But there's certainly work that needs to be done to ensure the quality components in these quite complex supply chains, where it's no longer UNICEF supply division buying for government, which is what it was for a long time in decades past. If I've missed something, Pete, just nudge me, but I think that's enough for now, because there's plenty of other great questions coming in. So back to you, Pete.
No, thanks very much, Kirsten. And I would really encourage everyone to look at the Stop the Rot reports that Kirsten's been leading the work on, because I think there's some really good content within there. We have, I think, Beatrice, there's another question for you, which was specifically related to the life pump which and the experience from Joseph Peary. I don't know if that's something you're familiar with that you could respond to. I mean, we are obviously the project is looking beyond the live pump and how we can improve public domain pumps, the Indemark and Afridev. But are you able to respond to that, Beatrice, on the hard operation of the live pump that was mentioned there? It may be related to the depth of the groundwater.
Sorry, I didn't see that question. Probably Abby could answer on my behalf because I didn't get it properly. I didn't see it.
Okay. Abe, are you able to come in?
Yeah, I can answer that question. Yeah, we know there. Yes, that's a very life pump specific question, but I'm happy to answer it. Yeah, I'm not sure which specific pump or community is being referred to there. We have been making improvements in the life pump, and that's I guess that's the beauty of having research and development and ongoing sustaining engineering on a pump, is that when an issue comes up, you can address it and make improvements, because no design is static. No manufacturer is static. Changes happen, things happen. You need to have a corrective actions process in place, a quality system in place. So we've had some issues where life pumps were hard to pump. We've been working on rectifying those issues, including working with our suppliers to get the correct specifications on it. It's a progressive cavity pump, so to get the correct specifications on our progressive cavity pump, we've been doing investigations. So we had some communities here and there that had higher than we would be happy with. So we've been working through those issues and making the improvements. And I think we worked through a lot of those questions over since the beginning of the life pump. And we have, if I can't remember the name of the gentleman, if he wants to email me, I'd be happy to dive into more details on what it was and how it's been resolved. And if the specific issue he's talking about hasn't been resolved yet at Design Outreach, we'd be happy to chat more about it and see what we can do to make it better.
Thanks.
Back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Lee. So there's, I think I missed one here, but there was one question around the experience in Asia of higher sustainability of less reliable hand pump models. So, for example, in many parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia, there are a lot of suction hand pumps which are very, very low cost and break down a lot, but are relatively easy to maintain. But of course, there is a limitation in terms of the groundwater depth, in terms of under the conditions that they can operate. But the question is whether there are, and this is an age-old question. I remember this from many years ago, that if you have a hand pump that breaks down often, but it's easy to repair, and people are used to that, and there's a willingness to pay because they know that that's going to happen, is that better than having a super reliable hand pump that very rarely needs repair, and therefore there may not be ready mechanisms to collect money for operation and maintenance? I think it's an interesting question, and quite an old one, as I mentioned. But I don't know if Richard or if you'd like to come in on that or on any of the other questions. There's also a question around prepayment systems for hand pumps and whether that's something worth exploring. I don't know if you have.
I think Sandy, so you turned your video on. Did you have some thoughts on the reliability? And
yeah, okay, come in first.
Thank you. Yes, the question of reliability. We were working some years ago in Tanzania with a chap called Jeffrey Kawa, who unfortunately died from a motorcycle accident. But his view on hand pumps was, if the major wearing parts last a year, that's long enough, because that means they'll be maintained regularly once a year. And yet we'll keep pump mechanics employed, it will keep the skills going, the skill base there. So some maintenance, ideally preventive maintenance, but if not cheap and simple breakdown maintenance, is a good thing in terms of making the system work long term. So we're not expecting to get the wearing parts to last 20 years. If the wearing parts last 5 years, then we'll probably get a breakdown of one or other wearing part every year or two, and that will keep the maintenance infrastructure in place. And that's certainly my personal feeling about what would be more or less ideal in that situation.
Yeah, and I would like to add that, a lot of the case studies that Beatrice gave, we're not talking about fast wearing parts that are cheap and easy to replace. We're talking about capital expensive parts like riser pipes, pedestals. These are big expenses for communities. So I imagine it's a lot different than the suction pumps. And these, as you pointed out, Peter, these pumps are going deeper, so that they need to have heavier duty parts that are more expensive.
Peter, maybe I could just come in briefly on that, picking up on Abe's point. I think some of the more extreme cases that I've seen recently of hand pump failures and the challenges that communities have in keeping them repaired was in South Sudan. And the component parts that would be normally categorized as long-lasting and infrequent replacement are breaking down very often for a whole combination of reasons, to do with supply chains, to do with affordability, to do with availability of hand pump mechanics and so on. But the fact is that communities cannot afford to repair their pumps when there's a major component like a cylinder or several lengths of galvanized iron rising main which have failed, or the bearings at the top of the pump. They can generally afford to replace the so-called faster moving parts, the seals. But that's as far as it goes. And it's true, I think, in many low-income countries that whatever payment systems that we come up with, it's going to remain the case that communities cannot afford these high-cost repairs, the major components of pumps. So the more that can be done to make them last, while, as Sandy pointed out, expecting regular replacement of the fast-moving parts, the better.
Thanks very much, Richard. Thanks for those reflections. I see there were a few other questions we didn't manage to get to. I know there's a question about data in terms of sort of current data on hand pump functionality. So maybe we can share something on that. I'm sure Kirsten would be able to share something in relation to that. But we're almost at the end of our time, and we'd really like to keep on time. So thank you so much for staying with us. It's great to see so many of you staying online throughout the entire webinar. Just to give a plug for the upcoming webinars as part of this 2023 webinar series from RWSN. So we have the next one on the 20th of June, which is looking at water for food, for drinking, for rural development, which actually there was a question related to that earlier on. So it would be interesting to look at that specific topic. And then on the 27th of June, the week after, there's on customary water tenure is the subject of that. So the registration link is there. Also, a reminder of the D groups, RWSN D groups for discussion. So any of these topics that we've covered today, we can continue the discussion on the RWSN groundwater group or rural water supply group. So yes, I see there's a question to share that link. I think that will be coming in a moment anyway. But I'd just like to thank our presenters first. So Richard, Beatrice and Michael, really appreciate your inputs to this, and it's been really interesting to hear the different reflections. I'd like to thank all of you online for your questions, and apologies if we didn't manage to cover all of them, but I think we managed to cover most at least. And of course, this is an ongoing conversation that will continue. So there is the link to the RWSN D groups discussion. If you're not already part of that, dgroups.org/RWSN. So please do engage there. This is the beginning or continuation of the process for the Stop the Rot initiative and for the Design Outreach project. And we really rely on your participation, involvement to get the best out of those initiatives and to really make a positive impact for all those rural communities that are so dependent still dependent on hand pumps and are likely to be for the foreseeable future. So thank you to everyone. Wishing you a good rest of the day, wherever you may be in the world. And yeah, thanks once again.